I'm Bianca Pitt, one of the co-founders of She Changes Climate. I want to take a moment to thank my two other co-founders who sadly can't be here today. It's Elise Buckle and Antoinette Vermeulet, who together with a whole raft of over 500 female climate leaders from around the world made She Changes Climate happen. We are a conglomerate of women. This is a completely co-created campaign from women of all around the world. And activism is one of the most important things we have had to take into hands to get our voice heard. Why is that? Because we have not had a seat at the table. We are not in leadership in business, we're not in leadership in government, and we're not in leadership at international climate negotiations. Now is the time to change this. If we want to avert the climate emergency, if we want to avert climate chaos by 2030, we have to bring women into leadership over the next years and starting today. I'm delighted to hand over the microphone to Georgia, who's going to moderate this panel. She's a fantastic example of an activist. She has taken the UK government to court for building incinerators and wanting to increase incinerator facility by 3 to 4 times. That is absolutely unacceptable. They deny that under the Paris Climate Agreement they have to reduce emissions. They say limit doesn't mean reduce. Georgia is challenging this in court, and we all have to thank her for that. She is literally making history here. And so are all of these other women who are sitting here today. Thank you very much, Georgia, and all of you for coming.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here. I'm absolutely overwhelmed that all of you have made the effort to come all this way out to East Glasgow, away from the Blue Zone and all the circus at COP. It's so wonderful to see you and so many gorgeous female faces. It's such a tonic. This is not what we're getting in the Blue Zone. So yes, we have made our space. We're here. And welcome to everybody online as well who's watching us live streamed. So, as you will see on this panel, this incredible panel, I've got women from around the world who, in their own ways, in their own spheres, are activists, who have all stood up and taken action and are really leading the charge in different ways. So I wanted to pull together a panel of women who could inspire us. No matter what form of activism we feel like we can participate in, we've got a range here of ladies from all different spheres, from finance, from politics, from law, from communities. And so if you feel like maybe activism isn't for you, I hope that by the end of this panel, you'll be feeling like whatever sphere you work in, you are also an activist. And you can follow these ladies and, get some inspiration from them. So what I'd like to do is just go along the table, ask each of these ladies to introduce themselves. And so if you could introduce yourself, please. I'll start with you, Osprey. Just to let you know, we do have one other person joining us who's a little late. Marinelle will be joining us, a youth activist from the Philippines, but she'll slip in at the end in a moment. If you could introduce yourself, please. Tell us what you do, and also tell us a little bit about your form of activism. Thank you.
My name is Osprey Oriole Lake, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel and all of the great work of She Changes Climate. Our organization is involved with women and feminists and gender diverse leaders from all over the world, working together to really bring forward this nexus of gender and climate and how important it is. I know we have a short time, so I'll give you the elevator speech version, which is that we're really involved in direct on-the-ground campaigns and projects, everything from reforestation to protecting old-growth forests. We do work with divestment to get banks and asset management firms to stop investing in fossil fuels. And we also work at the government level, doing a lot of work to stop subsidies to fossil fuels, as an example. So really a diverse array of work. And the thing that I would just say in this moment, we've been working a lot inside the COP. We've done a lot of events. We've brought frontline women, indigenous women, grassroots leaders from different countries in the world, so they can speak for themselves. This was lauded as supposed to be the COP that was the most inclusive. It's been quite exclusive, so we've really worked to bring in their voices. And I think, a takeaway I would like to make just very shortly is that in the Paris Climate Agreement, fossil fuels are not mentioned at all. The word gas, oil, and coal is not in the agreement. And we really see this as a huge gap, and that women, who are often leading a lot of these resistance movements to fossil fuel extraction in their territories and protecting forests, water, and land, are here to speak out, to say, no, you need to really deal with this supply end. We've also learned, you might have seen yesterday, that Global Witness came out with a report stating that the fossil fuel industry has the largest delegation of the entire COP compared to any other singular country. So that just gives you a good idea of how much that industry is continuing to infiltrate this space. And just in this last, since the Paris Agreement, of the largest banks, $3.8 trillion is still being invested in fossil fuel expansion and extraction since the Paris Agreement. So we need to work at the government level, but also with the financial sector, and really shutting down the fossil fuel industry. And we do direct actions, we work with Indigenous people, we work with grassroots leaders to do many different things, but I just wanted to highlight the fossil fuel part since we're at the COP, and this is just a big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, and we're really asking government leaders, where is your courage to stand up to the fossil fuel industry?
Thank you. Natalie.
Well, my name's Natalie Bennett. I'm one of the Green Party members of the House of Lords in the UK, and so you don't have to sit there wondering the accent comes from Australia originally. And I've been a feminist since age 5, when I was told, because you're a girl, you're not allowed to have a bicycle. And although I probably didn't know the word feminist for another 10 years, that was when I became a feminist. And I guess I became a Green. My first degree was agricultural science, and that makes me quite unusual in politics, although not particularly unusual in Green politics, in being a politician with a scientific background. So one of the things I want to encourage more people is to cross over that boundary of science and politics. But I was fascinated listening to the previous panel because they were talking a lot about soil and about creating an offensive ecocide. And by being one of the 2 Green Party members of the House of Lords, I was able to put down and force the government to debate 2 amendments to the recent Environment Bill, one of which was to create an offence of ecocide and to back the international campaign. Now, I didn't win that, although I did win some sort of concessionary words from the government, which is something to work on. But also, I put down an amendment to make soil a priority in the Environment Bill. And this was the first time the Green Party has ever won a vote in either Houses of Parliament. We won that vote. Now, sadly, because of the nature of British politics, the House of Commons then took it out and we haven't been able to keep it in, but it was still got a lot of focus on soils. So that's what doing politics of a party politics kind means, being able to be in the room. But what's also crucial, and I regard the Green Party as the political wing of the green environmental and social justice movements, is I spend a lot of my time going to schools, colleges and universities, different groups up and down the land, workplaces, saying, and a single message if you take away from today, I hope you'll take away, is that politics should be what everybody does, not have done to them. And what having politics done to us collectively is what's created the world that we have now. And it's very easy to get depressed about COP and COP, the official process, not delivering what we want. And the key thing is to recognise this is part of a process. And us being here in this room is a key part of that process of fighting for more space for women in that space. But we're also creating our own spaces. And there's a parallel COP. I'm sure many of you were on the march on Saturday. The amazing feeling, the atmosphere, people, different people, groups talking to each other. What's crucial is that people get together and build a different world. COP is only a small part, the official part of COP is only a small part of that. And I was once with a group of wonderful for 5th and 6th graders, so to age 10 and 11 in North Yorkshire. And I was saying to them, make politics what you do. And they were a very, very bright bunch. And one of them, the girls, turned around to me and said, so did you do politics when you were my age? And I really had to think about this because it wasn't a question anyone had ever asked me before. But I had to say, no, I didn't. I was really angry. I was a feminist and I was angry about all the time being told, not just because you're a girl, you're not supposed to do this, but actually being told you shouldn't want to do this because you're a girl. But I didn't know that it was possible to get together with other people to create change. I just raged silently on my own. And so I think, we hear a lot of negatives about social media, but people can join us from anywhere in the world right now, can be part of this community. We can build communities, particularly of women, but communities of poorer people, communities of people who can't travel across the world, and together make an entirely new kind of politics. And my final message is we need to focus on hope. Fear is the emotion of the far right, the people who want to grab resources for themselves and shove others out. I very strongly believe, I know, there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life if we just share them out fairly and if we allow every human being, particularly the women so often denied now, the right to develop to their full human potential. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to the end of the table now. Malini, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to add my thanks to the organisers of the She Changes climate campaign, to Bianca, Antoinette and to Eloise for their foresight and for getting us to land this issue at COP. Because my own organisation, so my name is Mala Nimhera, and I'm Indian, and I've been working as a feminist to change my sphere of influence since I was very, very young. So I've been doing this stuff for more than 40 years. I've been a campaigner, and I've seen many, many political cycles come and go. And I think for my own organisation, so I run Global Legislators, which is an international network of parliamentarians who want to promote good governance for sustainable development. That for the first time this year, I was quite sick and tired of the fact that we had so few female parliamentarians, because globally, only 1 in 4 parliamentarians are women. And the only way that we change that is by ensuring that people vote for women and that women feel safe in assuming a public, being in the public life, yeah? Because for a lot of women, their safety is what prevents them from actually going out there and assuming a more public role. All the more so now because most of the female parliamentarians, the politicians that I know, are so savaged on social media that they're thinking twice about whether they want to continue in politics, whether they should be in politics at all. So for this year, I wanted to make sure that we set a line in the sand, and we set this years ago, which was that we knew we were going to have a delayed COP. So for COP26, it's going to be in Scotland. And we wanted to make sure that we would aim for 50-50 female parliamentarians. Now, we succeeded in doing that in the things that we have control over, like who's at the table, who gets to speak. So we had a fantastic array of women leaders. There's no dearth of women leaders in every single field. So it's not that there's a deficit, it's you've just got to make a damn effort to go and find them. In terms of the parliamentarians, we had to make 2, 3, 4 times the effort to get women parliamentarians there. And I'll tell you, it really made a difference. So we had this big summit at the Scottish Parliament over 2 days, Friday and Saturday. We had 5,000 people viewing it all over the world, parliaments around the world. And we had 1 female parliamentarian. She spoke up. She was the only delegate from Malta. We had many, many female parliamentarians from across developing countries, in particular, really strong contingent from Africa and from Latin America. But she spoke up from Malta and she said, you know what? When your invitation came, there were 2 of us in the Maltese Parliament who could have gone. One was male and the other is me. And because you said that we have a preference for women because we want to make 50-50 real at this summit, she says, I got to go. So when you make the rules really clear, things can begin to happen, but you've got to push. So I just want to give you, because a lot of you are much younger than me, and many of us on the table, I was born in a family in which female erasure was the norm. My mother, when she got married in her early 20s, was a young virginal bride who had an arranged marriage. When she got married, in my community, I come from the north of India, I'm a Punjabi, in my particular community, not only her surname changed, her first name changed. So who she had been, erased. Now, my mum is a bit stroppy, like me, and she refused to go along with that. But so her identity was subsumed under her husband's. And for me, in my personal life, there are two numbers that have made a big difference. And those numbers are 13 and 31. Because my grandmother was married at 13 in the north of India. And I was married at 31. And those two numbers are really the shape of our lives. And they tell you how much has changed. She had her first child at 14. Perfectly legal in India at that time. She had 10 kids. Both of my grandparents had 10 kids, my grandmothers. 5 of them in both cases survived childhood. So this just tells you we have made strides. So when and I also grew up in a very different environment, so I don't go along with a lot of the hype, which is women have been held back. I'm sorry, I'm Indian. When I was young, my prime minister was a female, Indira Gandhi. The first female politician to become a head of state was in Sri Lanka, Sri Madhu Bandaranaike. In Bangladesh now, right, you have the main political offices are held by women. You have Sheikh Hasina, who's the prime minister. You have Shirin Chaudhry, who is the Speaker of the House of Parliament, and you have Khaleda Zia, who is the leader of the opposition. Now, what unites all three of them is, guess what? Have a guess.
Elite.
They're related to men. They're related to male politicians. So we have to break that. And that's why women need to feel safe that they can enter politics, any walk of life. Because when I became a feminist and an organizer, I did so because I was enabled to do so because I got a scholarship to an amazing college called Smith. And I went there from Calcutta and it changed my life because it was the first college in the world in 1872 which educated women for the workplace, for ruling. In 1872, they provided women with the same education as the men got in the Ivy Leagues. And that changed our future. And guess what? Who were our alums? Gloria Steinem, founder of Ms. Magazine. And you know, Ms. Magazine, her very first cover of Ms. Magazine is an Indian goddess. Because where did she learn her feminism? She learned it in India. Because the years previously, she'd gone tooling up and down India, learning about these amazing women that we have, you know, are part of our history. But it's not rosy, because India is still the country, the city I was born in and I come from, where you've got the highest rates of female feticide, the highest rates of violence against women. So you've got to absolutely fight. And I don't want to take up too much time here because there are so many amazing women you need to listen to. But this fight is long, and we have won in so many respects. So don't feel disheartened. I'm here and I'm doing amazing stuff, and each one of these ladies is here and doing amazing stuff, and we are rewriting the rule books, and we have been doing so decades, and your generation will continue to do that and reshape our world. So my message to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Nachlala.
All right, thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to connect with other amazing women from around the world that are at the forefront of not only the fight for gender equality, but also the fight against climate change. So my name is Anachila Lankombo. I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. You're all very familiar with what WWF does. Our mission is to stop the degradation of the natural environment because all life depends on it, even economies depend on it. And for me, as WWF Zambia, we work in communities out there in the rural areas that are most dependent on natural resources, but we're losing the natural resources at a very fast rate. These are communities also that are highly impacted by the effects of climate change. So when you're talking about water scarcity because of drought, for example, the highest cost is borne by women because they need to find the water solutions for their households. When you're talking about disease outbreaks as a result of climate change, that burden is for women to take care of. So this is where institutionally we come from, and also the reason why I'm working for WWF. But in terms of my own journey, I trained as an economist about 20 years ago at the University of Zambia, and when I finished school, usually most of my classmates would go and work for the central bank or any other financial institution, but my curiosity was different. I was always interested in learning more about the field of human rights, about the field of environmental sustainability, as well as the field of women's rights. So I decided to take an internship with the Women's Peace and Human Rights Organization in the United States called the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. That changed my life because I had the privilege of working with these amazing women from different ethnic backgrounds from around the world that were elevating and putting forward the value and worth of women. That was critically important. But beyond looking at the issues of gender equality, some of the things I learned through that internship was how we were holding corporates accountable to environmental damage. And that was like 15 years ago. And some of the issues of a 1.5 we're talking about today were issues that were discussed then. And unfortunately, we were not being listened to. However, it's not too late for us to keep the fight because that's what it's about. We have to be persistent for us to get what we need to get. Beyond that experience, I've had the honor and privilege of working with several movements across the African continent. I had the honor of work with youth organizations, basically trying to strengthen their leadership and their capacity to engage decision makers and policy makers. So I co-founded a network called African Youth Initiative Network, which has groomed and grown a number of young people, men and boys, girls and boys, who've been able to influence different spaces within their communities. I've also worked with women mainly in agriculture, like I said before. My work in Mali had us supporting a coalition of women that had been fighting for women's rights to access and own land. Historically, because of cultural reasons and religious reasons, women in Mali had no right to own land. And a lot of work had been done in terms of building the legal case for that. But it took other women coming together to say, how are we going to push this forward? Right now, with regard to climate, we are working as WWF in 10 districts that are most affected by droughts and floods. And our job there has been to facilitate and amplify the voices of leaders such as the chieftainess who's with us today, who are at the forefront of the fight against climate change. They are the ones who have to find the solution when a drought happens. We have a conservation agriculture program where we're supporting farmers, about 6,000 of them, transition from conventional to conservation agriculture approaches to farming. That is helping with the regeneration of the soil. That's also giving them more control and sustainability around their food security. We're also working heavily on the issue of deforestation and looking at alternative sources of energy. As you know, 80% of the population in Africa depends on fossil fuels. That is not sustainable in terms of energy sources. So part of the work that I've been doing has been to engage other women business leaders, particularly in the financial sector, to see what it is they can do to come up with products that could help women smallholder farmers, they could help women small businesses so that they could be at the transition of creating climate smart and green economies, local economies where they are. At COP, apart from amplifying the voices of communities that we work with that are doing amazing work, young people and women, our concern has really been to look at what is being done about adaptation. We're talking about aiming for 1.5. When you look at the situation in Africa, our temperatures are way below 1.5. So it means that we are going through what Europe is fearing we'll go through in 2030 and 2050. And so what we've been doing locally through the platforms that WWF has been creating has been to engage our parliamentarians, has been engaging our government for them to direct their own investments locally to areas that are going to help support the building of the resilience, but also the transitions that are needed. Here, obviously, we've added our voice, and the women and the groups that we've come with have also added their voice in terms of looking adaptation now. And for us, it would be important that this constituency that's here helps to educate that actually that what we fear about climate change is already happening at scale in Africa. So when we go back, the communities there that are impacted will ask about what the plan is to deal with the current displacements of people, the current diseases, and what is going to come tomorrow. Because we know if change doesn't happen today, we're going to have to deal with millions of people who are displaced and maybe who are losing their lives and livelihoods as a result of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Farhana, I'd love to come to you.
Well, thank you. My thanks also to everyone who's organised this whole series of events that are lasting all day today. So that's great. And we need to have these events in the main space inside. And we need to have all of the things that are being spoken of here inside every room. And that's really not the case at the moment. So my name is Farhana Yamin. I'm a lawyer. I'm an activist. I've urged everyone to add the word activist to their CVs because that's what we all need to do. It's not good enough to just be a parliamentarian, to be a CEO, to be a head of an NGO, an organisation, unless you also add that activism. I did that myself. I've always been an activist, but I've sort of hidden it a little bit, I guess, because I was very much involved in these negotiations. I've been involved as a legal advisor and as a strategist and as a funder. I work in the philanthropic community. I'm doing that at the moment since 1991. So it's a long time. And for me, this COP is part of a very much bigger cycle where I think we're resetting our relationship with nature and resetting our relationship to each other and resetting and rethinking what we mean by power, how we shift power and resources to those who are on the front lines. And that's what I've tried to do all my life. I guess just a little pat on the head for myself. I was the person who actually put forward the gender decision in 2001 when we were completing the rule book of the Kyoto Protocol. We're here completing the rule book of the Paris Agreement. And I was pregnant with that child who's standing at the back. And what happened at that COP, which was held in Marrakesh shortly after the 9/11 events, was appalling levels of discrimination. So the most amazing women who had been negotiating all of the rules were at the forefront as negotiators, as heads of delegation, were then completely excluded from all the decision-making bodies that we were then establishing. And they were incensed. And I knew that I was going to be taking time off for maternity leave. And I think that, being pregnant made me really courageous. So I spoke up in plenary and got a round of applause. And everyone supported this idea that we should then have a gender, a gender element, and that we should tackle overt discrimination. So that decision was the basis. So we did get it adopted, and all the men, felt very guilty and sheepish, and it went through without any opposition. It went straight from the presidency and was read into the final papers. So there's no party submission or anything on it. But then it took 10 years, essentially, until we got to Doha and we had a much better gender program adopted, and year-on-year reflections on that. So my tribute is also to all of the people, all of the women who have worked on that. And we have a long way to go, however. So today I want to make a plea to you to, as feminists, argue for a justice reset. That's what we need here at the COP. We have a lot of groups arguing for representation and inclusion. We have the gender constituency, which has, I think, done the most homework in integrating and mainstreaming that. We have the Indigenous Peoples Platform that was established in 2015. We don't have such a structure for youth, actually. There's a very patchy framework. We don't have a framework for workers. We have a preambular paragraph in the Paris Agreement on a just transition, but we've spent most of that time discussing the just transition from the perspective of fossil fuel industries. So here, I think at this COP, we all need to unite behind a single ask, and ask for a view of justice that is inclusive and covers all of us. We've been almost, I feel, fragmented and given a body here, an institution there, a work program here and there, but actually what we're asking for is a complete overhaul. So I hope that when you go back and talk about and connect with all of the players that you're part of here at COP, you will make sure that in that COP decision there is a provision which enables us to come back next year and discuss what climate justice and just transition and what justice would look like in the context that we now see it. So I think that this process is still a magnificent and inclusive process, even though at this COP we have seen so much exclusion, both inside with rooms being closed, meetings not being announced, and obviously against the background of COVID, so many delegations and people who could not come. And we can only get to the place that we want to by totally opening up this process and challenging the vested interests that have dominated thus far. And the more and more opening up that we do, the more institutions that we govern, that we open up to that inclusion, the better. And I want finally just to add, I get a little bit uncomfortable when we talk only about essentially the grassroots and those institutions of power. And I think what the lesson that we really need to hold on to is actually women are in leadership positions all over the world, and we don't recognize that. So in farming, it's women who hold up the world's farming community through small-scale farming, through agroecology. It's women and Indigenous people in their communities who are fighting and resisting and at the forefront already, and we tend to not put them at centre stage here. And our job, when those of us who have access to boards, to power in the status quo, is really to ground their truth, to support them. And that's what I hope that all of us are in service to, and that's what we need to do to reset the global system as a whole. And I guess, for me, in conclusion, Glasgow isn't really just about an upgrade of the Paris Agreement commitments made 6 years ago. It's also part of a 400-year cycle that is coming to an end, and a form of capitalism that was based on white supremacy, that was based in gender inequality, that diminished and made invisible different kinds of bodies, whether they were black and brown bodies, there were women, whether they were disabled or trans, all the different bodies who were not useful or included in this vision are now fighting back. We can see it. We are the majority, actually. And we need to now seize this moment and say, actually, we want to tear down this system as a whole. And that's what I'm really, really encouraged by and hope that we can achieve in not just this COP, but after. Thank you.
I love that message. I love that, because I think the thing is, as an activist, it's easy to feel alone. It's easy to feel like, this is just how I feel, and I feel different from everybody else. But actually, we are many. We are many, and actually we outnumber the others who have told us that we are small and we don't matter. We outnumber them. And so if we come together in an inclusive way and we really stand up and make ourselves heard, and listen to one another as well, support each other in speaking, I think that is just so powerful. Thank you. So Marinelle, thank you for joining us. I know you just slipped in. Could you introduce yourself, please? Osprey, I know that you need to go. Have you got a few minutes?
Yeah, once you've done.
Lovely. Marinelle, if you could introduce yourself, please, and tell us what it means to you to be an activist, please.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Hello, everybody. I'm Marinelle Abaldo. I'm a climate justice advocate from the Philippines. I'm also a Super Typhoon Haiyan survivor. Before I became a climate justice advocate, I am a gender and child rights advocate. And then I was already developing programs in remote communities and schools to talk about child rights, gender rights, women's rights, and the basics of climate change. Because in our community, I am from a Philippines that is, my community is at the end of a peninsula that is facing the Pacific Ocean. So that is really a remote community, and a lot of girls there don't have the access to education, to information. They don't even know that they have rights. They don't even know that they have women's rights or child rights. So I know the need for them to know that they actually have the right to education, they actually have the right to, safe environment, to even menstrual pads, all those rights that we ought to enjoy. They don't know that they actually have the right for that. And then 2013 came, actually we commemorated the 8th year anniversary of Super Typhoon Haiyan yesterday, because Super Typhoon Haiyan struck our community last November 8, 2013. It killed thousands of lives. Up until now, we still have 1,600 dead bodies that are missing. And after Super Typhoon Haiyan, I really saw how the gender imbalance in our place, in our community. My peers were forced to drop out of school. They were the first one to be forced to drop out of school because it was the boys who are like prioritized to attend school. So because their parents cannot afford to send them to school, they prioritize the boys to study, to continue their education. So my peers, the girls, were sent to big cities to work as housemaids, as sales ladies, so they could support their families back home. I saw how imbalanced the treatment was, even the access to health and access to mental services, even access to even just comfort room in evacuation centers. There is no like separate comfort room for women and boys, and there is no even room for for women who are breastfeeding. So in evacuation centers during emergencies, there is no electricity. Sometimes there is no water sources. So everybody is just sharing what is there, and the rape cases actually increased at that time, post Super Typhoon Haiyan. And in the Philippines, on top of being the deadliest country to be an environmental advocate, we have been insisting our voice, women's voice, in the climate space, even the advocacy space. Because we always have the connotation that we're women, we're emotional, we're loud, and those are like things that are being regarded to as weaknesses. But for me, it's strength. Our being emotional is actually makes us compassionate, empathetic. That is why I know the hardships that my peers went through. And I was very lucky that I got a scholarship and continued my college education. But these people, these women, didn't have that kind of privilege as I had. My father is a fisherman, my mother is a housewife. So really, when Super Typhoon Haiyan happened, we went back to zero. We have been seeing a lot of dead bodies everywhere. We were wet and cold for how many days? We didn't have food, water. We were like taking a bath outside where everyone can see us because there is no like a room that we could do our womanly thing. And there was like also one of the hardships that we have encountered at that time is how we can make sure that these women in makeshift houses, in evacuation centers, are safe even if there is an emergency. So I told myself, I don't want to see that kind of devastation. I don't want to see that kind of gender imbalance. And up until now, we're still insisting our voices, our presence in this space, to be able to have that kind of space to actually speak up, to be able to have that space to actually share what you want to share, because you're always regarded as, you're women, you are like, when you get married, you will not be here anymore. So that is just those kind of hardships that we still have up until today. Even now at COP, we don't feel really represented. Like a lot of activists are women, and they always like, oh, you're just first, you're children, you don't know what you're doing. Second, you're women, you're just loud and you're just so emotional. And I felt offended by that because we know what we're doing. It is our It is our future that is at stake, and you just don't tell us what to do because we know what are the issues in the ground. We know the solutions that we have in the ground. We just want to have that kind of space to be heard and to be considered because a lot of these leaders are saying that we are listened, but truly we're not even considered in negotiating and decision-making tables. So it was just so sad that we drafted the Youth for Climate Manifesto in Milan last September, and then the Global Youth Statement during COP26 before COP. And at the day 2 of COP, we saw both of them in a trash bin. It just shows how these leaders are seeing us, how trying to make us like tokens that they can just post on social media and say that we are hearing you, we are listening you. So those are like my frustrations that up until now, we are still trying to push for our space, to push for our voices to be even just considered. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I know, Osprey, you've got to run, haven't you? But you've got a final comment to make before you go.
Sure. Sorry, I've got to go back in there. Thank you, everyone, for all of your comments and the incredible work all of these women are doing, and many of the women in the room. One of the things I just wanted to close by saying is that, we are working in a system of oppression that has been going on for a very long time. And the intersection of patriarchy, colonization, racism, and capitalism are all interwoven in these systems of oppression. And so it's really important when I look at the work that women are doing is that we have these immediate goals that are emergencies in our communities and the frontline women that we work with where they're dealing with life and death situations right now in this moment. But it's also important that we have a long-term overview analysis and that we have the depth of knowledge around what a feminist approach to all these issues are. And there are decades of work being done by feminist scholars, by feminist activists, for those of you who are interested from all of our organizations and many more, where you can really learn about all of the history of what has happened and the history of oppression that we need to address. So I just wanted to point out that we need to sort of have the big overview so that we have a racial economic lens as well as understanding these crises that are happening moment to moment. And to this end, yes, it's absolutely about having 50% of female bodies in the room, but let's ensure that those bodies are Black and brown and Indigenous and Global South and island nation women, and it brings a feminist analysis with it. Because if we just have more women in power, quote unquote, who are following the mainstream, that's not really going to get us where we need to go. We've already tried that. It didn't work. So I just really want to encourage us to look at what does it mean to have an intersectional feminist lens and to look at a lot of these platforms that many of us are engaged in inside the COP, all year long outside of the COP, as we really move forward to, if you will, smash the patriarchy and bring forward really a new worldview and social constructs that are very different, that are connected to the land. And we can't forget the historical relationship between the violence against the land and violence against women. And that has been going on for a long time. And we're here to say, we must change now, we can change now. And this room full of all of you really is inspiring because I can see a lot of you youth are the future who are gonna carry this torch forward. And you can do it, and we are here to support you, and I'm here to support all of you women as well in the work you're doing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that really speaks to me. I'm an engineer. I'm managing director of an engineering consultancy working in the construction sector. And one thing that I've found through my journey is in order to be taken seriously or to feel like I'm taken seriously, I have to almost be more alpha and more male than the men around me. And that, I think, has been really damaging to me in my development. And it was actually only as I grew older and more comfortable with myself that I felt much more comfortable about owning my femininity in this space, by being a mouthy woman, you know, by actually standing up and not being afraid, not hiding myself. But I think that is something still that is very scary when you go into these halls of power, which are predominantly male, who don't want to speak and who do... I think there is a sense of, you know, stay quiet, you're different, you don't fit in here. So I really want to kind of come... Something else that you mentioned as well, Natalie, on didn't win. You know, I think there is a... You know, you said something about, you know, there was a vote taken and you didn't win. Well, I recently went to court with the government and I didn't win. And there's something there about standing up and being different and taking your space and then not winning, which can be quite, it can feel so vulnerable and crushing. I know everybody on this table will have had the same sort of experience. So I'd love to hear from you how you feel. Where do you get your resilience from? You know, how do you recover from that? And how do you nourish yourself in that space of activism where you're so different and you don't always or sometimes don't ever win? How do you do that? So let me start with you, Fana.
Well, that's a good question. And as I said, my entire professional life has been spent in this space. This is my 24th COP. I've routinely spent 2 to 3 months away from my family, my children, and it's exhausting. And I guess the lesson I've learned sometimes, it is to take a break when you need it during the day, during the week, during the month, during the year. Climate and all of these injustices are systemic. They've they're centuries old. We can't topple them overnight. I feel we're closer than ever, actually. I feel I'm here to celebrate the death of those systems and to announce the birth of all the new freedoms that we will work on together. But it's exhausting and it's never ending. So take breaks, involve your family, your friends. I'm really delighted, as I said, every now and then one member of my family chooses to come and that's really nice. So they get to see what I do and they're nurtured. I'm nurtured by that. And I feel that's the most important thing that I've learned. But also that we're winning. We are really winning. Even when we lose, we are winning because we are standing forward, we are fighting, we're resisting, we're championing, and that feels exhausting sometimes mentally and physically. But I feel just, we're on the right side of history, working all together. And I just want to say one thing, like I've started working recently in a new job with some of the largest foundations, taken up this job partly because they've realized they have not funded black and brown people. They have not funded the global south. They have not funded young people to the extent that they should. They have not funded. They've tended to fund almost entirely in the US and Europe and funded mainly to white men. So things are changing. The resources will be flowing and we should just support each other every day. Have a hug with someone who you're lifting up and don't forget to ask for support.
Yeah, definitely. Nachlala.
Well, I would agree with her that actually we're fighting a bigger system. Right?
Yeah.
Even if we lose on one action, we are making progress overall. Because it's on record that we've actually challenged status quo. Yeah. We've challenged an injustice. And for me, what keeps me going is really making sure that I'm carrying my support system, my allies with me. And so at that point when it does not go right, there's that support that is there. I think within our own journeys, we've had amazing men that have stood with us, that have amplified our voices. Even in my current role, sometimes it takes another man restating what I've said for it to be heard. And so the role of allies in our journeys, I think, is significantly important. And then also having like the big picture, the the fight may be in smaller actions, but if you keep ahead the big picture, and if it doesn't work, you still look for, I think I'm a permanent optimist, right? I have my moment of disappointment, but I still bounce back and look for other opportunities to still advance what I so strongly believe in. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Malini, we've only got a moment left.
Yeah, so I'll focus what I think is really important, and that is that please don't forget the domestic. I have been involved in international politics for decades, and I can tell you that the reason that we don't see so many international commitments come to pass is because people are not focusing on domestic and local politics and shifting that. I don't come here looking at myself as a victim, as a brown woman who doesn't have a seat at the table or who doesn't have a voice. I've never thought that about myself. And very few women who I work with think about themselves like that. So I would urge you to stop thinking of yourselves as victims. Think of yourselves as doers. Activism in my country has a bad name because activists get shot. They get effectively, these are the environmental defenders, these are the human rights defenders who are deeply repressed and oppressed in most countries around the world. And so to come here to a COP is a privilege, and it is a very inclusive COP. And I'll tell you why. Because when I started out doing this, which is 35 to 40 years ago, I was at Kyoto, and my job was to lead the work of Friends of the Earth International, which was the largest international grassroots organization, federation of 60 countries, all working on the ground. And we were there in force. And what were we there with? We were there with a real important message. And that we brought through, and that was the vital importance of platforming women. This is in 1997, for those of you who are millennials. Yeah, so at that time already, there was a recognition. Why was there a recognition? This is where you really need to do a little bit of history. In 1985, we had this really important conference called the Nairobi Conference, and then in 1995 was the Beijing World Women Conference. So everything that we are talking about here, governments made a commitment to in the Beijing Platform for Action for Women. The points that my colleague has just mentioned, she began with the issue of women's land rights. We've known about this for 30 years. Governments have made commitments. Why haven't they delivered on them? Because people focus at the international. And they don't realize that all decision-making is local, it's domestic. So if you're not doing your stuff in your countries, don't come and talk big at international fora. And I'll give you an example. My Prime Minister, last week, Prime Minister Modi, made a big announcement about net zero for India. In 2070, when all of us will be dead, those of us who got, a bit long in the tooth, we'll be dead by then. So it's easy for people to make commitments, politicians, way into the future. They won't live to see them because in the future, we're all dead, as Keynes said. However, in India, there is a debate, and the debate is about the increasing liberalization, the deregulation of environmental protections. So at the same time as a political leader comes over here because he's savvy and he knows for a gullible international public, for an Indian to say net zero, everybody says, Tali maro, this is wonderful. Whereas back home, what we're actually seeing is the unraveling of environmental protection for coastal zones, for environments, for forests, etc. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I really have, after 40 years of engagements in business, in government, as a civil servant, in many, many different fields, I have very little tolerance for people who use victimhood and for people who say we should have a seat at the table. Well, take it, because no one gives you. You take, and you must reshape at the national level. So talk about the NDCs. For every person who feels that their NDC doesn't reflect ambition, make sure that you're raising it in your parliaments, in your governments, in your local councils, because all of us have access to those. So I'll shut up now.
Thank you so much.
You see, there's a lot of work to be done, and it's at the ground level.
Thank you. Well done. That was great. Melina, thank you so much.